Nope. Nope, we didn't lose it.
Right. You are prompted, man.
Well, listen, I want to thank everybody that's chimed in. I want to thank you for taking out your time to carve out this moment to where I have my friends, I have my brothers on the line with me. I'm so excited. I am elated about the conversation we're getting ready to have. For those that are watching, you get the opportunity to look behind the screen, a sneak peek at pastors from different generations, pastors that are now generation, that are pastoring different caliber of churches on every level. And I thought it was important that pastors as leaders, that we have a conversation to how do we stimulate, whether it's racism or what's going on. One of the things that I want to say is this, is that every pastor on this line is dealing with that epidemic of COVID-19. And even with this pandemic that's happening, this pandemic is happening, there's not a vaccine, but there's another pandemic that's happening and has been happening that there has been no vaccine for, and that's racism. And we're trying to figure out, how do we start a candid conversation about not just racism, but how do we learn from each other? How do we grow from this? And I thought it was important to grab my brothers for us to have this conversation. I'm so thankful that they're on the line. And man, if I start talking about them, I'll get a little tearful because I love each and every one of them. You got Pastor Miller, that's in Orlando. I mean, it's crazy with New Beginnings, doing crazy down in Orlando. Probably one of the fastest growing churches in Orlando. Man, I got Pastor Josiah Silva on the line. I won't even talk about Orange County. I think he has like 200 locations just throughout Orange County. He's just everywhere. Every time I see Freedom House, it's Freedom House at LAX Airport. They just have church everywhere. I think, and you quote me if I'm wrong, Josiah, I think y'all have, just this COVID-19, y'all fed, what, maybe 100,000 people? It just, yeah. It's been insane. I have my brother, Patrick Winfield, the Potter's House of Fort Worth, you know, it's my brother. And how, listen, Paul Daughtry, been on Fox News, Victory in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Paul, I think y'all fed like 200,000 people during this COVID. So everybody that's on this line, I don't want anybody to think that we're just here and not doing the work of the ministry. We're doing church outside of church. Yeah. So for those that are wondering, listen, and most of the guys on here, they're not rushing to get on the news. Everybody that's on this line, they don't care about the news. They just want to make sure ministry get done, people get fed. Yeah. But hey, guys, I kind of want to just kind of jump in here and just kind of throw this out there. We already know what has happened, what has taken place in Minnesota. I think that's just kind of was the straw that kind of just broke the camel's back about that. And just my observation, murder. It was a murder. And we talk about the justice that needs to happen. And today we're going to talk about the justice, but I also want to talk about preventative measures. How do we stop this from happening? And Paul, you can talk more about this too, even as it relates to stuff like Black Wall Street or, you know, in Tulsa and the large church that you do pastor, but you have a prominent voice. And I think, and I want to throw this question out here, fellas, what do we need to do? Not just race, not just pastors. What do we need to do to kind of help propel this pandemic that's happening?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll just interject and say, you know, first and foremost, thanks, Pastor Don, for putting this conversation together and bringing us together. As I'm looking at this, all these men of God, I love all you guys, but we're also all across the nation. You got East Coast, Middle America, and then we're on the West Coast. And you're absolutely right. This is something that's struck from coast to coast. And I think what we need to do is have this type of conversation. You know, I'm going to be completely transparent. I don't know if I have all the answers. Of course, we know Jesus is the answer, but I don't know if you know, that we can in one, you know, setting just put it all together. But I do know that we can start having conversations to understand each other and to begin to have these type of moments where we say, hey, listen, where are you coming from? What's going on, and not do the ostrich, put our head in the sand and pretend like nothing's happening. Right. I think that's the danger of our current cultural situations. We have too many, I'm just going to be bold, too many Christians, too many people that should stand against every ounce of hate and racism of any race, of any demographic, of any social, economical stereotype. And to pretend like it's not there, I think that is the most hurtful. I'm not going to say angry, but that's the part that just kind of says, really? You don't think it's there?
Right.
Like, come on, man. You know, like you don't pretend like nothing is there. Like it's all in my head, you know? And I think that happens is because we don't seek to understand. You know, the Bible says that understanding brings foundation, you know. And so I think that having this conversation, understand, is a beautiful thing. So before we go into anything, I just want to say, I think these are the steps that are going. You guys are much smarter than I am, and I'll just let Pastor Winfield figure it all out for us, man.
Well, I won't be able to figure it all out. I do know that the first step is the conversation. I think here is the place that's a concern and a consternation for a lot of people, though, that conversations have always been had. Mm-hmm. And I think the more we see what's happening with issues of race, I think the more people are starting to embrace the passion of a people that have been saying it and screaming it and protesting it for a while. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think is happening. I think that there are certain things that oftentimes we don't understand about a person's passion, and you won't understand a person's passion until you live in their pain. Right. And so the conversation really does help us to be able to talk about that passion so that you can understand my pain. One of the things that I've seen that has been tremendous is to hear everybody, you know, our Latino and Hispanic brothers and white brothers say and stand with us in this and say this is not right and say that this is wrong. And in times past, we haven't heard that. Right. And so it's been great to hear that coming from different pulpits and different thought leaders all over the country from different hues. And so that's been encouraging, and that is a part of it, right? That's a part of possibly creating some preventative measures. But I'm going to be as real on this call, probably in a way that maybe you guys haven't seen me before, because this is one of those things in which I do feel passionate about. I'm not sure if we can stop it all. Right. That's like saying, is there a way that we can just stop sin? Right. As pastors, if we had a potion to do that, we would have did that a long time ago.
We'd be out of a job.
Yeah, we'd be out of a job, right?
To the West Coast, if you find it.
Right. And everybody could go and live their best life without us.
That's it, yeah.
But that's not the case, because humanity is humanity. Mm-hmm. And so people have tried to legislate the inhumanity. Mm-hmm. And it is hard to legislate morality, because you can legislate it with a good intention, but you've got to depend on people to enforce it with the same level of heart and intention. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't happen. Well, you can monitor the ones that are enforcing it. But within the context of you monitoring the ones that are enforcing it, you're going to always have some bad apples amongst the whole bunch. Mm-hmm. So this is not an attempt to ostracize every police officer, to ostracize every politician, no more than you can ostracize every pastor or every teacher or every educator or every person, or every man or every woman for doing something for an individual's plight. But it is to say that having these conversations, and the more we shine a light on it, of awareness, mm-hmm. the more people will become more aware of it. And the next time, possibly the next time, there will be a thought, a different thought, a different way of presenting it, a different way of handling these issues that will be more productive in the future. I am here for all of the smoke. I am here to make sure that, and I want to hear everybody's perspective, because I just want to hear it. So I know you guys, I love you guys, and all of you are great men in your own right, just great men. And I know your hearts.
As you were talking,
I just want to hear you.
as you were talking, I just want to add real quick, one thing, and I'll pass it back to you, Pastor Don, is I thought about the verse, Proverbs 24, where the Bible says, through wisdom, a house is built.
Yeah.
By understanding, it is established. And through knowledge, its rooms are filled with precious rubies. And that's what we're doing. We've got to get wisdom on the situation, understand so it can be established, and allow our hearts to be filled with that. So
I want to jump in here and say something too. As we were talking about this, I was thinking often in dealing with my children, dealing with children, conversations are nice, but sometimes it takes consequences to change things. And so our conversations in the past have been great. We're going to have a great conversation today, but without the body of Christ as a whole, America as a whole, rallying together and beginning to demand consequences. I'm with Winfield on this. I don't think it's delusional, guys, to say that we can eradicate racism. It's an issue in the human heart that only the human heart can eradicate in its own self. But what we can do is lessen it the same way as we have tried to lessen other horrible things. Murder has been happening since the book of Genesis, but there are laws that are set in place to give severe consequences for that sin. And so we curb it a little bit. What angers me, and I probably don't have as much of a right to be angry as everyone else in this conversation, but what angers me is that historically, year after year, racism is perpetrated, now to the point where we're seeing people die on camera. And that's one of the blessings in what happened with this video with George Floyd, is that it is undeniable that this is a murder. Anyone with common sense and a functioning brain would have to observe that this man's life was taken without any cause. Because it's that blatant and it's that obvious, it's now forcing people who normally have been riding the fence to choose one side. Now, I'm not a fence rider. I've been on the side of justice and the side of right my entire life. And I'm just thankful to be able to add my voice to this conversation and say, I don't want to just have a conversation. I want to lobby for consequences or whatever it may take to bring the kind of changes that are necessary. Then, of course, later I want to share some things that I think are fundamental flaws with the way we do see, the way we perceive one another and communicate. And I know we'll unpack that later, but I'm on the team, guys. I just want everyone to know that.
right.
I think, and one of the reasons, especially as you were talking, there is no way I would even assume that we'll solve it. I think this becomes step one to us instituting plans of actions and call to action, not just for whether you're Latino, Hispanic, Black, white. I think all of us should have a call to action of how we're going to communicate this. A plan of action of what we're going to do, because if we can't change 1,000, if we just change one, I'm satisfied with just changing the one, because the one will not allow it to pass on to generations and generations. So if this conversation of us moving forward with different plans of action change one, I'm okay with that, because while Jonathan, what you said is great, but while we're talking about and I want to say whether it's punishment, whether it's consequences for that racism, that's for the sin that takes place for that police officer. But it's a heart matter. And also I want to go beyond that racism is not just for police officers, it's not just for that. It's institutional racism. It is. You have to create a Rooney Rule just for the NFL to hire someone. That's a whole nother level of we talk about racism. So I don't think this is a be-all cure. And I think that's a great analogy, what you talked about, Winfield, as it relates to us curing sin. But if we can bring knowledge to it, awareness to it, how do we deal with it? When Jesus talks about that parable about the Good Samaritan, it's crazy that the fact that the priest walks by and the Levite walks by, which now exemplifies the church is walking by with their head in the sand, thinking, since nobody's watching me, I'll keep preaching the gospel. I'll tell everybody Jesus is the answer, but people are still dying. Jesus is the answer. But if he's the answer, then what is he answering? And I didn't mean to interrupt you, Paul.
Go ahead, Paul.
No, I just think, everything you're saying is so true. And, back when Terrance Crutcher was shot in Tulsa about 4 years ago in 2016 by a police officer, and it was all on national news. It was in North Tulsa. It was literally 1.5 miles from our church's outreach area, Tulsa Dream Center.
Wow.
And there was uproar, there there was just complete just sadness and grieving, and people were trying to figure out, this did not need to happen. Just like we saw with George Floyd, this should not have happened. This was a murder, and by the hands of people that were meant to protect us. And there was turmoil in our city. And so I remember Al Sharpton came and he held like a big rally in downtown Tulsa that next week. And I decided to go. So I go to the rally, and I'm with my assistant pastor, AJ, and Tim, who is our executive director at the Dream Center. The three of us show up down there. And I remember seeing a friend of mine that I graduated school with, DeMario, and he's holding up this sign that says, "It's time to end racism in America." And he says, Paul, come over here. And so I go over there, and he goes, "What are you doing here?" He's like, "You're like the only white dude here." And I was like, "I'm here because I care. I'm here because I want to be with you." And my heart breaks. And he said, he's like, "Man, we're afraid." He's like, "We're angry. We're mad. Which one of us is going to get shot next?" And he said, "Would you hold this sign with me?" So I held the sign. We did a march down the road. And then that next weekend at church, some people came up to me and they said, "Hey, why did you go there?" And I said, "Because why wouldn't I go there? I'm a pastor. You can't pastor people whose perspectives you aren't willing to walk with and listen to it and have at least some sort of empathy and understanding." And our church is very multi-ethnic, multicultural, from all different ethnicities, all different backgrounds. It's a melting pot of just so many. It really is a miracle. But I had some people get upset at me, and they said, you're just going to stir up more unrest. And I said, well, there's things that are wrong in our nation. That's why the unrest is there. And I'm just joining in with a cry for what can we do to change it. And I agree with what Pastor Winfield said, that we have to, and really what Pastor Jonathan said, we have to hold accountable these officers that, in their minds, it's a mistake, but that mistake was captured on camera and it didn't look like a mistake. It looked like a clear, you knew what you were doing and you should not have done that. And you abused your powers. That's not a mistake. When my 4-year-old makes a mistake, I know he makes a mistake. And then I know when he doesn't make a mistake. I know when he knows what he's doing. And in these cases, yes, we have to hold these people accountable. They should be tried the same way that any citizen of America, no matter what race they are, if they're an officer, if they murder someone, they should be tried the same way that anyone else should. And that's what I think, those consequences are going to drive home something, that officers, you do not get off the hook. Just because you have a badge, you cannot abuse your powers, whether it's against whoever, a woman, a man, whoever, and I think, agreeing with you that racism is definitely an issue in America, I do think that churches have a chance to push back against it, to fight back against it, to bring some change. And I agree with Pastor Patrick. We're not going to fix sin because racism is sin. But I do think that just like we've seen progress be made in certain areas of our world, for instance, you see, there's a lot of progress that's been made on people who need clean water, and all these churches building clean water wells all over the world. They got behind it. They put their money behind it. Sex trafficking, all these churches giving money to end sex trafficking. All right, so now let's take all of our energy worldwide and let's figure out ways that we can fund and push forward. Love thy neighbor, be the good Samaritan, listen to people, see people. Color blindness is not the answer. It's celebrating everyone's color. Everyone is unique. Everyone's fearfully and beautifully made. And it's not about, we're all the same color. No. We're all different colors and we're all valuable. All of us are so valuable. But we opened up a conversation in our church where we had officers come on stage, and I had different people in our church come up on stage, and we just talked about it, and it went well, but we had some people leave the church over it. And our assistant pastor, he told me, he goes, "Bro, you're going to ruffle some feathers because we're in the Midwest and not everyone here is going to be happy about these kinds of conversations happening in church." And Tulsa, like you said, the race riots that happened 100 years ago, you know, it seems like people want to forget history, move past it, kind of pretend like we're over it. And we're coming up on the 100-year anniversary next year of the Tulsa race riots, where Black Wall Street was burned down, and it was, you know, hundreds of African Americans that suffered violence by white people in our city. And so we're talking about it. We've been talking about it. How can we heal? How can we recompensate areas that have been hurt? How can we get some better restaurants and, you know, eating areas and shopping areas in parts of the city that were burned down 100? What can we do to pay back the bad things that have been done? Well, and how can we, you know what I'm saying? Like, these conversations have to happen.
You're saying that because now I think I want to, since we're here, and I love everybody hard here, so I know there's no ill intent. One of the things is you're not just from a pastoral standpoint, but just from a human race standpoint, you have compassion for what happened over 100 years ago. And you made this statement, which I think is profound. You said, how do we heal and move on? Well, it's hard, and I'm speaking from the Black man now. It's hard to see other people heal if it didn't hurt them. I'm the one that's hurt. And if you don't need healing, but you don't have compassion for me, you'll make statements like, get over it. Well, it's easy for you to get over it because it didn't affect you, but it actually affected me. So, but if you took time, I'm not looking for an apology. I'm just looking for understanding. Okay, I get what you're saying. Like a good therapist, let's walk through this together, and don't just throw me to the side and say, tell your race to get over it. Slavery is over. Well, the act of slavery may be over, but the mentality of slavery isn't. Because it's still a mental, it's still a heart thing. So whether Black Wall Street was over, and it's about a leverage thing, but if we don't talk about this, if I don't say, Paul, hey man, I'm hurting, and you say, hey Don, hey Pastor, man, tell me where you're hurting, and you listen to me. As a matter of fact, I appreciate you more because you listen to me. But if you don't listen to me, now we have things like riot that's happening in Minnesota, which technically a riot is just the voice of the unheard. So you haven't heard my pain, so now I'm gonna show you my pain. Yes. And then now we judge the pain that we never dealt with. And I think it's those type of discussion which you talked about, Paul, which I think is great, is, hey, my race is hurt. Listen to us talk. And I think all of us on this line, God has blessed us to where we're kind of in a place to where we're financially okay. However, we pastor people who may not be. And so where one part of our congregation may be okay and not affected, while the other part may say, hey, pastor, you know that, man, that hurt me. So I think that's good what you're saying. So how, as me being a Black man, you being white, help me walk through the healing. Don't judge me for it. That was 100 years ago, but it still affected us because you don't know financially what Black Wall Street could have done to help America or help my family or help your family to where equality really means equality.
Absolutely. And that's what, and in those conversations on the stage, there was a lot of tears between people. And my heart was just to bring the conversation to the table and let people know in our community, we as a church are not afraid to go there. And we're not going to pretend like it doesn't. We're not going to be that little church that just, puts our church masks on Sunday and praises and then doesn't talk about the real issues in our city. So we pulled up some pretty interesting conversations, and then we began to do it on podcast. And I'm so thankful, Pastor Don, that you're doing this right now and that you allowed me to be a part of the conversation, because I'm with you. I want to listen, and I want to figure out what can we do? What are some tangible things we can do in our city, our community, our neighborhood, our church, as pastors, to facilitate racial healing, racial reconciliation. And like you said, the white community has not been hurt. So it's not us being healed. It's us doing the work, like you said, to just sit back, listen, and apologize, and then figure out ways.
And Patrick, you could probably talk to this. Honestly, I don't want 40 acres and a mule. I promise you I don't. I don't want 40 acres and a mule. I just want my kids to have a great opportunity at life.
Right. Well, give me 40 acres and a mule. I am not going to, I ain't going to trip. Yeah. Go ahead, man.
That's not funny.
Well, I will take the 40 acres though. No.
No. There is. Here is what's needed and necessary. And we talked about it previously. We need understanding, sociologically speaking, every incident, because slavery is an imbued mark upon the fabric of our society. Period.
Right.
You cannot say to the average thinking Black person that yeah, but this country was built on Christian morals. Well, what Christian morals was that? Especially when you see that slavery and thievery was a part of the building of this country. Now, I'm not saying that forget America. I love the country that I live in, but I always acknowledge that there are some issues within the fabric of our country, and I don't disguise it or try to hide it through Christian blanket that says that it did not exist. Not only did it exist, but there were some sociological issues that went along with it, that's connected to it, that we see it today, that is inculcated within the systems, our educational systems, economic systems, and political systems, that is happening today. And if we're not aware of them, then we will allow for them to continue. So having the conversation and highlighting the conversation and highlighting what Black Wall Street was to Tulsa and what it could have been to the country and ultimately to the world is very important, and the psychological impact that it had on people after that happened. See, you can kill a person or you can injure a person one time and the wound may heal, but that's the physical wound. There's always a psychological wound that it's going to take a little longer to be able to heal, and you've got to be able to navigate those waters of trauma to be able to heal them. So one of the things that for us here in Fort Worth, we've had a couple of things that went down the wrong way. We had a woman by the name of Tatiana Jefferson, who was killed in her own home by a police officer.
Mm-hmm.
Who was doing a random check based off of a neighbor calling the police. And I think this is a picture of how we perceive police officers. When we are in danger, it is told to us, call 911. We call 911 and the police officer comes out, and instead of knocking on the door, seeing who he is, checking, he goes in and commences to shooting. A woman in her own home in front of her nephew. The psychological impact of it is going to live on beyond whatever the consequence of that officer is. Okay, and that's the part that we need to understand when people are picketing or when they are protesting, and the protest turns into a riot.
Right.
This is the I am done with this. Because now if this police officer that put his neck on Mr. Floyd's, or put his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck, would have been bum rushed by a bunch of brothers that came over there and killed him, then they would have been angry. The world would have been angry at these people who killed this police officer. But the same outrage needs to happen at this police officer killing this young man, Mr. Floyd, and the civil unrest that's happening as a result. There is this thing of how we perceive then police officers versus how white people perceive police officers. Reality. If you call, you're calling for help. When we call, we've got to worry about hurt. And that's everybody saw the woman on CNN who approached the man who was a bird watcher, who was a black man, and she said, "I'm going to call the police on you." And the black man was doing nothing to her. "I'm going to call the police on you." And when she called the police, the way that she made it sound is that this man was going to kill her. Well, thank God that the police officers did not respond to her emotion, but that is the thing that we fear. Okay, so there's this thing that, you know, in the 60s, when the civil rights movement was really happening, it really at its boom, there was a thing that was happening within the context of the civil rights movement, that the Black Power movement that happened, the Black Panther movement, was a movement to be able to police our own people, because we didn't trust the police officers for help. And when you cannot trust the people outside of you, you turn inwards to trust the people inside.
Yep.
So let me say this, and I know this is, I'm trying to just kind of relay some of the things and details of our psychology that causes for us to think differently about these kind of situations, almost to the place of physicality. That if we don't talk about it, we will react to it physically.
Yes.
If we don't, in some way, shape, form, or fashion, create policy and legislation that hinders it, then it's going to be perpetuated. And to Paul's point, if we don't, and Jonathan's point, if we don't do something within the context of our judicial system to say to them, we're not taking it anymore. We're not taking it anymore. You're going to have to do something. And police officers are going to have to be held accountable. So the firing, the arresting, the charging, and some heavy consequence and heavy penalty put on them, they may think twice. And if we can at least get them to think twice before they do whatever dastardly act that they were thinking in their head that they're going to do, then to me, that is somewhat of a win.
Winfield, I want to add, if I can, fellas, another layer of that. Just to show you that it's West Coast, it's Midwest, and it's in the South. Most of you know Ahmaud Arbery in Brunswick, Georgia, which is literally probably 40 miles up the road from us in Jacksonville. Same thing, arguably jogging through a neighborhood, gets blocked off, gets shot and killed, jogging through a neighborhood by a white man that's formerly police officer, that's formerly works in the DA office. 2 months later, gets charged. 2 months later gets charged, but only gets charged because the video comes out. So even if we create policies, we have to put people in office that's going to put the doggone policies in place. Because if the police says, okay, you know what, I'm gonna go to jail, or I may, get punished for this, but I have friends that are in the DA's office or the judge that's gonna let me off, this goes beyond just policing. The judicial system as a whole. I'm not saying it need to be reconstructed, but if we're gonna get these policies, let them not be biased. Also let those who are going to implement the policies not be biased as well. That's all we're saying is, give us a fair shake. If I make sense, if murder is murder, if I'm gonna get 10 years for murder, let everybody get 10 years for murder.
Yes.
Because, I know this person in office, I'm gonna get off not 2 months later, because Ahmaud Arbery in Brunswick, if not for the video, we have no idea. We don't know what happens. We have no idea. This is just another, again, black man shot. Who knows what happens?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the point that Pastor Winfield was saying, and how you cannot legislate morality. You can't. I mean, we can put every law in place, but if the heart of America is not healed, then that is going to be the downfall of what it is since the beginning. We all know racism. You've heard this saying: racism is not a skin issue; it's a sin issue. We got to. If anything's going to get healed in America, it's going to get healed behind the pulpit. It's going to get healed with spiritual leaders. It's going to get healed with us, speaking to the hearts of people. And I'm all for. Don't get me wrong. I'm all for the laws, but what good is a law if, like you said, no one's there to enforce it? It's not going to happen. We're going to find ways all around it every time. And so it goes back to where are the preachers silent? Are the believers silent? They say that the fastest, dying disease in America is heart disease. Well, I think it's also spiritual. It's a heart disease. It's a sin disease that we need to speak to, and we need to have these type of conversations that, to Pastor Paul's point, you're right. Awareness is now coming up, and we have an opportunity in our generation. I like that. I give credit if I remember who posted, but someone said, this is just what we've seen. This video is what we've seen. We haven't seen all types of other videos that we haven't seen. But this social media generation is now where you cannot hide. To say nothing is to pick a side. To pretend like it's not happening is you picking a side in this generation. And
John, let me cut you off 1 second, Silva. Now answer this question. I mean, Silva, Miller, John, Patrick, you can jump in if you want to. How do I talk to my colleagues, my white brothers, my evangelicals to say, hey man, I need you to speak out about this. I need you to say this is wrong, even when it doesn't affect you. How do I get them to understand my pain without expressing my frustration with it? Am I making sense as a black man?
You know, I'll say from my perspective, it's what you're doing right now, Pastor Don.
Right.
You're inviting people to the table.
Conversation.
You're inviting people to the conversation that is going to initiate what is taking place. Like I'm praying right now, whoever's watching this, and I don't think it's by coincidence that you're going to stumble on this, this is a form of God bringing you to the table, of you getting into this backroom conversation of how we can begin this healing process from, those that have been affected the past 100 years that we may never fully understand. As a Latino, I have a small understanding. There's a lot of racism. I grew up in East LA actually. And man, all the time, they would profile us all the time. They would just come here, they would check our pockets and pull us over and throw us around and all of that. It's been done to me. So I know in a small way what that feels like. But it's inviting people to the table that I think some people are afraid. And I'm also going to say, it's ignorance. They don't know what to say. I think some people just don't know. They don't know what. They're very smart people, but I think they're afraid, like, will I say something wrong? Will I anger? And I think just being willing to say, hey, I'm going to come out and deal with this. I'll say this statement, but Jesus dealt with racism, right? Remember the Samaritans? In John chapter 4 and verse 4, the Bible said he had to go through Samaria. He had to go through it. And I think this is something that we have to go through as Americans. You can't avoid it anymore. You can't walk around. You can't pretend like it's not there. We have to walk through this. And in this generation, I think that we can see some amazing progress in this area because you can't hide it no more. And I can't wait to see what comes out of it. But it's going to start with us. It's going to start with us having these conversations, really speaking to the heart behind the pulpit and having, I'm so blessed to see different people having these conversations to lead people to language. Every generation needs their own language, and we need a language for this.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Okay, Paul, just real quick, because I do want to add to that as well. I think our perspective is very important as far as what we're dealing with. It is an issue of racism, absolutely, undeniably. But even beyond that, and I told you this yesterday, Pastor Johnson, on the phone, we're dealing with a human problem. This is a humanity issue. I think science kind of got it wrong in the 1700s, the scholastic community, when they began to put different people in different races. And that's not my attempt to diminish people's place and their identity, but rather my attempt to pull down the walls. I don't think there should be necessarily Hispanic race, white race, black race. We're human beings, for crying out loud. We are part of the human race. And so this is why I have never, and by God's grace never will, get a part of a conversation like this or on social media and say, hey, as a white man, I'm upset, or as a white, because I've never, and you guys are my friends, so you'll laugh here, I've never considered myself to be a white man by any means. I've considered myself to seriously just be a human being. And so not as a white person, not as anything, just as a human being, I'm really offended over what I'm seeing as far as how mankind is treating one another. I think we have to be honest about some things. And Pastor Paul, you tapped on this, and I was trying not to jump in when you said it, because I've heard people that are white say, oh, we don't see color. Well, gentlemen, I got to say, I disagree with that. I see color. Everybody sees color. And it's not necessarily a bad thing to see color, because we can't fully appreciate something unless we see it, unless we recognize it. It's how we see color that matters. So if a white person sees an African-American person and automatically judges they're better, and the black person that's the problem. If you see someone and you automatically get intimidated, feel better or even less than somebody, that's the problem. So it's not just a race issue, it's a human issue. And until we begin to embrace the diversity, and this is what I love about the life God's given me, I've got some of my closest friends that don't even live in America. One of my best friends is from Ghana. He stayed in my home. I've stayed in his home. I don't see him as a black person. I see him as a Ghanaian. I see him as someone that can bring a perspective of life to me that I can't gain on my own. He brings food that I've never eaten before. I've had experience I've never had before. So I don't see him as different. I do see the color. And in that, I see the appreciation that God is using so many diverse people to make Jonathan Miller the person, the cultured person, the diverse person that I have become. So until we really begin, I think as leaders, to preach these kind of things from our pulpits and to use our social media platform to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is that the blood washes all humanity. It doesn't matter, black, white, Indian, Native American, whatever it may be. We are human beings. And that's why this conversation is so powerful, because we don't see each other as different. This is a human issue, guys.
I was going to say something just, I love that, what you just said, Jonathan. I think one of the things he just said was having close friends that are different ethnicity than you.
Yeah.
And as a parent, cultivating that, fostering that. My parents were intentional when I was little. My dad was doing an outreach. It started when I was 5 years old. We were doing an outreach in North Tulsa before we started the Dream Center. My dad just really had a heart to help North Tulsa, which was 80 to 90% African-American community. That was where Black Wall Street once was. It was, like you said, Pastor Don, just the devastation, the effects of what happened. And Pastor Winfield, you hit on this. It wasn't just lives that were taken. It was the economic just pain. And so my dad got stirred in his heart in the late 80s. He had a pastor come and preach at Victory who was African-American. And the pastor said, Billy Joe, you've got a heart for all people, but your church is totally white. So if you're going to change that, you need to hire half a staff that is not white. Your whole staff needs to be made up of the people you want to reach. And so my dad started changing his whole philosophy, started hiring people that were not white, started hiring people that were Latino, African-American, Filipino, Asian, but predominantly African-American, because that was the second highest ethnicity in our city. And so he wanted to make sure our city knew our church needs to look like our city. Our church does not need to look like Australia or what, I don't know. It doesn't need to look like that was bad, but you know what I'm saying? It needs to look like our city. And so anyways, through that, we started doing this outreach. Well, one night I was 5 years old. I'm going door to door. We're inviting people to this tent crusade out in the apartment area in North Tulsa. And this young guy comes up to me. He was a couple years older than me. And he pushes me in the mud. Then he punches me in the face and he goes, "Get out of here, you cracker. You don't belong in here." And he said, "All you guys do is steal from us." And I just started crying because I had no clue what's going on here. I was there with my mom and dad, and I happened to be by myself for like that 1 minute. I went to another door to knock to invite someone to come. So I said, "Dad, what's a cracker? And why did he say that we've stolen from him?" And, my dad starts crying. He said, "Paul, there's a lot of bad things that have happened in our country. It's not your fault. It's just, it goes back 100 years ago. And it's still, the pain is still there. That's why we got to do what we got to do. That's why we got to go to these areas. That's why we got to serve. That's why we got to love. That's why we got to give." And so he started teaching me at a young age what was going on in our city and just the racism and the hurt and the prejudice and the anger. And he started showing me movies. My mom and dad, when I was 6 years old, started showing me movies like Roots and Perfect Harmony. And then, later on, just other movies that came out, the Ernest Green Story, and just all of these movies. And that was what educated, because I didn't read books, but movies educated me. And then we'd sit and talk and ask questions. And I'd say, "Mom, why were they so mean to that boy? Why were they so mean to that family? Why did that dad have to drink from a different water fountain?" And they would teach me, "Hey, this is what our country did, and it's wrong." And it started changing when a civil rights movement began, and when Martin Luther King, and they started teaching me all the history, but they said, "We've got a lot of work to do." And that's why in Tulsa, we're going to be a church that continues to stand for this. So fast forward, our church ended up taking ground. We changed from being an all-white church to being a very multi-ethnic church. It took time, but all through the 90s, we just shifted.
Winfield, you see what happens?
See, I mean,
I guess the
we gotta bring
conversation
you in
was
person.
good.
We gotta bring you in person.
Pastor
Zoom
John,
has the power.
did I say something wrong?
The conversation was too good.
My bad.
That's great.
That's when you know the conversation was getting really good.
Hello. That's so funny.
No, but Paul, please continue. What were you saying?
No, that was the end of it. Was just that it had to change first. My parents had to change something in our church. They had to do what Jonathan was saying. They had to preach it from the pulpit, and then, or Silva, and then they had to begin shifting our, just kids and families, and again, be willing to lose some white people who are still carrying racism in their heart that left our church. There was some white families that came to my dad and they said, "Billy Joe, our church is fine as it is." And he said, "No, it's not." And they said, "You don't need to change that. You just need to let the, they were very racist, but they said, people just need to stay in their own churches and we just need to stay as we are." And my dad said, "You can leave our church if you don't like what I'm about to do. But until we start to look like heaven, I am going to contend to get more people in our church that don't look like me." And so we lost. I mean, this was back in the early 90s, but he lost quite a few white families that it exposed them. The second you start talking about racial healing, racial problems, it exposes the racism and the prejudice in the hearts of people who say, "Why are you talking about that? Don't go there." And so that transition those people, but they're not there anymore. But there's still work to be done. Obviously there's a lot of pain.
And in that pain, Paul, there has to be not just this one discussion, but candid, continual discussions about this, because I believe it was Jonathan that kind of alluded to it earlier about what you should say and you shouldn't say. That's why in cross-pollination of communication, it's good to have, whether it's Black, whether it's Latino, it's good to have that level of friendship so they can tell you what to say and what not to say. So now you don't have to be afraid of the communication. So I know if I go in this type of arena, and I hate to say it, I'm Black, and I hope y'all still love me. The danger is, and I mean this with all my heart, Paul, I have to study your culture, but you don't have to study mine.
Right.
In other words, I have to teach my sons, okay, when the police come, you do this, you do that. This is what it takes to succeed. You have to do this. Well, at the same time, like Paul, you said your parents were intentional to teach you the culture. They were intentional with that. The danger in most churches or leaders, we don't intentionally teach our kids from the standpoint of you're not less than or you're not more than. But let me tell you, this is what happened. This is what happened. I'll use the example of Gucci. There's no way Gucci would have done that if they had a diversified executive board, when they did what they did with the monkey and all that kind of good. If there was, and just my observation, I'm not on the board, but if a Black person had been in there, they probably would have said, "I don't think this is a good idea. No matter how good you think it looked, this is the way it's going to report." This is no indictment against Gucci. It's just the image. And I believe it was Martin Luther King that says that Sunday is the most segregated time in the world because we're comfortable in our community. It doesn't affect us. Preach Jesus. Don't bring him to my house. Watch this. Preach Jesus, but I don't want to live like Jesus. These are the things that we don't want to talk about, have this communication. And Paul, first of all, I love Victory. I love what they're doing. Probably one of the most, diverse church. And I'll say this from a Black standpoint, it is the one place as a Black community, we're used to being the minority. So when I go into a white church, I'm accustomed to that. But when it comes to me bringing in white leaders or me bringing in white members, when you're not used to being the minority, now if you're not educated, you'll think, okay, why am I follow a Black guy? Well, there's nothing wrong with me, I think. I got some good leadership characteristics. I think I do. But society has not taught you how to be the minority in situations because kind of subjectively or not mentally, we've been taught superiority, 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 superiority. And subconsciously we're taught, okay, I don't want to go under a Black church, or I don't want to do this. Now, again, there are some cases where Black pastors have a predominantly, cross-pollination of churches, but in most cases, what your dad did is phenomenal. But from us as Blacks, we're used to being the minority. So your father hiring me, I'm a minority on my job. I'm a minority in the church. And I love you guys. But if you ask me to go to a black church, if you ask me to go to the Potter's house at Fort Worth, and I take my family with me, therein lies the dichotomy of us having that conversation and say, no, it's okay. Winfield is great because he had a relationship with Paul. So Paul is teaching him, hey, with your white members, don't say this. With your black members, don't say this. And you have AJ, Paul, and I love AJ, and I'm sure you have some more that can say, this is how you communicate. When a black person, and Patrick, you could take this even further, as blacks, if we start getting loud, we're not really getting aggressive. We're just, some cases, we're just loud.
Hey, that's a Sicilian thing too. You can't have that to yourself. That's a Sicilian thing too.
Come on, man.
Well, reality is, if you don't understand, if you have not been inculcated to be educated about a culture, then you can't understand their passion. Passion is something that is, I think, that's a part of every culture, not just the African-American culture or the African-American tradition. It's just that our passion has always been propagandized or popularized as evil or anger. And if people are used to that level of backdoor education about black man's passion is anger, then it's uncomfortable when you're in that scene and when you're in that particular environment. You can come to the barbershop and see a bunch of passionate men talking. Doesn't mean anybody is about to shoot each other or fight each other. It's just passionate. You can go to family reunions and see the same kind of passion over a card game of spades or gin rummy or tonk. I mean, you can, but it's the same passion. In addition to that, in another race, you can go to any university or any football game or tailgating and see a bunch of passionate men, but it's preconceived as that passion is safe, but our passion is dangerous. And that plays along. I think what people need to understand is that the media, what we have seen, what we have watched on television, videos, all of that stuff has played a significant role in how people have perceived the African-American race. This is a part of the systemic issues. And so as a result, we see it worked out in the church. So it is harder for people who are white to sit up under black leadership versus a black man sitting up under white leadership. And that's just a part of it. And everybody has got to ask themselves the reason why, because that's not to say that all white people have that situation, or all of people have that situation. Because I do have white families that's a part of our church and our ministries, and I do have Hispanic families that's a part of our church and our ministry. And so, but they have been around me and around us long enough to understand that my passion is a part of it is culture, a part of it is personality, and a part of it is that I'm a Pentecostal. So all of it works together. That's a good mix right there. So I mean, that's something that we have got to be able to face. I think what everybody is saying is great. That the education that happens in a particular home is important or indigenous to that particular home. So Jonathan, what you said is just powerful to me. And I'm sitting here listening to you and I'm saying to myself, that is a very, very different worldview. And listening to Paul and Josiah, and I understand in interaction, some of the things that he's going through and living in East LA. Everybody has got a different vantage point in their homes. Mm-hmm. Problem is, we don't know what's being taught in people's homes, right? And we don't know how images are being portrayed. The first time I taught in a predominantly white school in Las Vegas, and it was very interesting how one of the students said, "Wow!" when he first saw me. When he first saw me and heard me, it was like, "Wow." A black man, wow. And it was, I didn't take it as being racist. I didn't take it as a knock, but I took it as okay, So your perspective that you've seen of Black males have been based off of videos and rap videos and all of that stuff, because that hip hop culture kind of portrays a side of our experience, but not the total embodiment of a full experience. So here I am standing in front of you, giving you a different world perspective because I'm able to engage with you. And me being your teacher and teaching you, how about it, English and history, how about that? And Bible is a different kind of vantage point. But that is something that I think if we are having these conversations can help happen all over the world and in people's families. If we do not do this, then people do not develop a different worldview that is going to help inform their worldview and maybe eradicate some of the racist tenets and belief systems that they may have in their heads that was propagated and fed by a slanted media. So, you know, that's the reason why we have these conversations. Josiah?
I wanted to ask a question, and, you know, we've been talking about bringing awareness and really being educated. I want to be the student right now, and maybe there's someone's watching this and that's thinking, give me language. And so what can we do, Pastor Patrick, Pastor Don, to really stand with our Black brothers and sisters during these times? What is key words that we can say that can help, you know, have that compassion to show that we're understanding, you know, aside from social media or over the pulpit or in conversations that are happening in backyards and dinner tables when they say, hey, what do you think about, you know, what are some key things? Teach us, educate us. What maybe, I don't know, just, I want to be a student.
I'll kind of start, Patrick, and you can take it after me. For me, I'm not concerned about your public voice as much as I'm concerned about your private voice.
Okay.
What you say in public is grand, and I get it. Social media, that's fine, because I do. You have to have that public presence. I'm not knocking that, but I'm more concerned about, Jonathan, if I can move back to what you said, the heart. What do you say privately when you're in your yacht club, when you're with your friends, when you're out golfing, and it's just the four of you? Are you willing to do what Paul's father did? Are you willing to stand out and say, hey, even if you leave me as a friend, as a white friend, I'm willing to lose a white friend to help a culture that has been embodied with so much hurt. In other words, I want to know you love me. Don't love me just in front of people. I want to know, do you love me privately? Don't throw off my pain. Help me walk through this pain. And I'll say this, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. Paul and I are familiar with, we have a mutual friend, Dr. Denise Bob, and she has helped me as well as him with some pain. And she walks us through this particular pain. I want to know if you can walk with me through the pain. Hold my hand. It would have been so great, especially in Minnesota, if somebody, white leadership, Black leadership, before the rioting start, before it start, let's get before this. Let's stand together. Let's go. The firing was great. Now it should have been firing and charges at the same time. Let's have this communication up front. So I've taught my sons this. They already, and it could be wrong, but it's my mentality. They were birthed in this world with a deficit. The deficit is that they're Black. And that's just kind of what I've taught them. This is what you have to do. You're going to have to work twice as hard. And I want to know and I know this from Paul, I know this from Jonathan, because I know they love me, that, hey, we're going to hold your hand as you walk through this pain, because it's painful. Don't throw my pain away. Don't act like this hasn't happened. In other words, don't teach American history, then teach African-American history as though they're mutually exclusive. No, they're together. This goes together. We're together. We are, and you're the historian, Patrick. You tell me if I'm wrong. We are probably one of the only races of people who didn't volunteer to come. we didn't volunteer to come. We came. So since we're here, let's make the best of it. But don't say this didn't happen, or don't say get over it, or don't say we didn't just see the video of you murdering this man. Because racism is now just getting filmed. It's still happening. And our education goes beyond what you see on TV. And I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna turn over to Patrick. This disturbs me. Most of you guys, if you know me, especially if you're watching, I'm about 6'3", 6'4". I'm a pretty big guy. So generally when I go to the class of hotels, I won't give any, and especially Marina Del Rey, I won't talk about anybody. The first question I get asked is, who do you play for? What? Who do I play for? I don't even play football. I love it, but I don't play it. So I don't even know if that's racism or ignorance or based off what you see on TV. This is the only thing I can afford. And I kind of just speak from my heart. And I hope I'm speaking from a community that's been hurt. That's what I know a portion of me looks for is don't deny what's happening or don't brush over it, whether it's political, whether it's in sports. What Colin Kaepernick did was creating leverage. Let's talk about that. No, he's not disrespecting America. That man had nothing he meant was wrong toward America. It was, this is the injustice that's happening. Can we please just talk about it without you judging?
Wow.
I think all of that is good, Don. I'll just add. I'll take nothing away. Just add. I think it was Dr. King that said that I won't remember the words of my enemies, but the silence of my friends.
Right.
My God.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the silence of my friends that hurts the most. So when I hear you, my love for you guys goes to a whole nother level. My appreciation for you goes to a whole nother level because, what Paul said about his father is something that I'm not sure a lot of pastors are willing to do. And that is lose parishioners over standing with people who have been marginalized and with the Black community in particular, who has had numerous of racist things to come towards us. So when I hear that you're willing to lose in order for you to stand with me, that means the world. Mm-hmm. And your appreciation or our appreciation for you rises. That's number one. Number two, I think Job's friends made the mistake of opening up their mouths while he was in a crisis. Because if you don't fully understand the crisis that you're in, you have a tendency to interpret the crisis as something is wrong with you.
Yeah.
And instead of sitting with somebody long enough to be able to feel their pain and to look at the world through their eyes, sometimes before you speak, you just need to sit and ruminate. What we're doing right now is a great example of that. I appreciate the question, Josiah. I really do. And I'm sure everybody that's listening appreciates the question and all of the comments that everybody has made. The third thing is what Paul did. Came out of his pulpit and sat there or stood there with people and was willing to at least hold the sign. Mm-hmm. Be with us. That means the world. If I talk on it more, I'll get emotional about it because for a long time, people have not been willing to hold the sign with us.
Right.
They talk about the sign, talk about the behavior, but never stand there in the midst of it. And it takes a certain level of strength and courage to be able to do that. I appreciate that. And then here's the part that I think everybody can play a part in. What Don said is what you say about me privately matters. What I love about the Bible is that the Bible highlights every foible of a human being. And the first church was not without racism. The Grecian women were not being served.
Right.
i.e. the deacons came to help out the serving of the Grecian women. They didn't say the Jewish women were not being served. It was the Grecian women. The conversation that Paul has with Peter in private in the book of Galatians, the first chapter, and concerning his issues with the Gentiles, that he acts one way when he's around his Jewish brothers, but acts another way when he is around, the Gentiles. Paul had enough courage and intestinal fortitude to call an apostle of the first church to the carpet about his racism.
So good.
Good.
So
And if we do that, if we call them to the table about their blatant racism and their insensitivity to another people's plight, that will be grand. That would be great.
So good.
So good, Pastor Patrick. That's really,
Thank you for that.
I never thought about that. I mean, we look at that story all the time, Paul and Peter, and you're absolutely right that that's a great pathway of
Good.
restoring. And when earlier, Pastor Don, when you told me the healing needs to happen in the African-American community, not, the white community because they haven't been hurt. But where I was thinking was the healing that needed to happen in Peter was a different kind of healing. The healing that needs to happen in the white community is a healing of they're so possessed by a demonic stronghold.
yeah,
And that's not all white people. That's just those that are still dealing with racism.
it's demonic.
But that cop who kept his knee on George Floyd's head, and George is saying, I can't breathe. That cop needs to be healed. He's possessed by a demonic stronghold of a lack of any concern, a lack of any compassion. That man, he needs to serve his sentence in prison, but he also needs to be healed in his mind. You know what I'm saying? And that's where I think the healing has to happen in some of these people that are carrying racism. They've been trained by their parents, who were trained by their grandparents, who were trained by their grandparents, that came through Gettysburg and lived with Confederate flags and still have a Confederate flag in their house. And they've been taught this demonic stronghold of we are superior. It's demonic strongholds. It has to be broken. They got to be delivered. They got to be healed in the mind. And if they've committed crimes, they need to pay the consequences. They need to go to jail, prison. They need to be tried for what they've done, but they also need to be healed in their mind. Otherwise, they're headed to hell. And I know God's will is that every man would be saved, even the worst of us.
Right.
That the man who's killed George Floyd, God still wants him to be saved, but he has to pay the consequences, and he has to get healed in his mind, and he's got to be delivered. Same thing with all of these situations where there's been racial profiling. Jesus was racially profiled in Mark chapter 6. When he came, when he came into certain areas, they said, we know who you are. You're from this town, and you're poor, and you're, all these. And so I think, people need to be healed of that racial discrimination.
If I can just say one great point for me, as it relates to educating, Paul, you just taught me something. Just listening to you talk, I was talking from the standpoint of a victim, but I don't know why, but I've never thought, wait a minute, they need to be healed too. There are mental scars. Just you talking made me think, wait a minute. Okay, so I never thought about it that way. So this is why it's important for the discussion of there need to be dual healing at the same time.
Yeah.
Well,
If I can
go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, I just want to jump in here because it stems to mental health. It stems to the condition of the human soul and the human heart. We have a lot of police officers that we've worked with at our church and in community events. And some of them, and you guys know this because you have security, there's some bosses, there's some dudes. They're tough. They're composed. And even when there's circumstances that break out, they're in charge. They're in control. But there are other people who you see that have a badge and a gun. You can just tell by the way they carry themselves that psychologically, they are not in a position where they should be entrusted with that kind of power and that kind of authority. When you have a doctor and you flatline on the emergency room table, you don't want him going crazy. You want him to snap into this professional mode of being the boss, being in charge. So I think we have a lot of people entering law enforcement that aren't being vetted properly. I don't think the psychological evaluations overall are sufficient enough. I think we need to ask a lot of questions with these people who want to become police officers. Have you been bullied? What was your childhood like? What was your upbringing like? What did your grandmother and grandfather teach you? Because we are equipping people with weapons of murder that have not the capability to maintain their own self-control, their own self-composure. And so it comes to, we need deliverance, but if these people aren't willing to get delivered, then something systematically has to shift and change. Who in the world are we allowing to become police officers in this country? That to me is an issue that has to be addressed.
That's a good point.
No, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, just like there's been this proposition with people who own guns, there's, legislature and laws that are trying to be passed of people cannot buy a gun unless they've passed a mental health check, which I'm all for. And I think that is so healthy. I think, why have we not been doing that in the first place? No one should be allowed to go get a gun if they've recently had crazy meltdowns where they've threatened to kill people. Like, we can't just sell guns to anyone and everyone. In the same case, there should be, like you said, some test before someone is given a place of authority where they're called to protect our community. If they score on a test, and those tests need to be updated, there needs to be, I mean, I don't know. I've got friends. When our city walked through everything it walked through, all of this stuff started shifting in Tulsa, and our mayor elected just a brilliant, powerful African-American police officer, promoted him to become the chief of police. And his name's Wendell. And he came to our church, and he's just, it's healthy for our city. And it stirred, it was just, our mayor started shifting things. He said, we're going to take tests. We are going to get every racist cop off of the police force in our city. And he was pretty bold. So he took some hits from people in the city that did not like it. But I thought, man, what you're saying is, through some of these situations, where can we partner as a church, as law, and look at ways you should not be on the police force if you have a track record of going on Facebook and saying racially completely insensitive things. They should be checking that before they hire a cop.
Yes.
And it takes mayors and governors to, like this right now in Minneapolis, there is a demand on the DA's office, on the mayor's office, on the governor's office, and this uproar is healthy. These Facebook posts are healthy because it's forcing these governors and mayors to go, you know what? If I don't make a change, I'm not only going to be voted out, I'm going to have a massive. I'm going to have what happened.
The National Guard.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah. So it's good. It's like you said, this stirring in these cities is going to lead to change that needs to happen. And it's sad that it took someone getting killed by a racist moment. You know what I'm saying?
I wish in some type of way, especially anybody that's watching that has this type of power or something we can institute, that whether it's a policy or it's in our institution, in our college education, whether you want to be a police officer or a lawyer, I wish there was some type of, and it may be, I just wish it was holistically across the board, to where if we know the dominant cultures in America, there should be some type of classes or sessions that are mandated before you're a police officer, before you're a lawyer, that we talk, that you have the ability to sit at the table with somebody that's African American, somebody that's Latino, there's somebody that's white. And I mean this across the board. I'm talking black cops to white families as well, white cops to black families. So you'll know that my son isn't a threat because he's black. If he's talking loud, that's not him being disrespectful. Okay, I think as long as we're ignorant to the culture, anything that you're ignorant to, you come up with your own conclusion, and then your judge and your understanding may be wrong, and that he's not a threat. So I think there'd be some type of way that there's a table that we can educate, that we can talk about each other, that we can talk about our differences. And I think somebody alluded to it earlier, and appreciate those differences and not judge that. Because this uproar in Minnesota is good and it is necessary, but how do we go beyond this? In other words, this is a justice that needs to happen. It needs to happen. But how do we institute preventional measures? They say, okay, how do we prevent this from happening the next one? I don't want to see a next one. I don't want to see a next video. We can't heal everybody. But if there's some things in place, that we can at least have the conversation.
Can I just bring up another point? And this may be a little different, but I want to add it here.
Mm-hmm.
A part of this perversive issue, and it connects everything. It's so much collateral damage to it that is just almost hard to kind of put your hands on one thing. But I understand that it's not just the issues, the personal issues and views of police officers that's standing in the way. It's also the idea that there is a particular psychology that they are dealing with too, because they face a lot. And I have family members who are police officers. I have police officers in our church. I've counseled police officers. I've done rides with police officers. So I get a picture of some of the things that they face. There were times in which if I really felt like if I had not been there at a particular arrest, that this would have gone wrong because the young lady was not being belligerent. She was demon possessed.
Mm.
And I had to explain to the police officer what it was, and he had to trust me enough for me to do my job. Because this did not call for police.
Right.
This calls for authority. So after that situation, we all understood and thank God that it did not go south the way that it could have gone south if there was no one there to be able to interpret what this situation was. I think police officers are not literally taught how to discern those kinds of situations because it's really subjective in that particular moment. That's a part of the problem. And so one of the things that we have asked for our mayor to make sure it happens with our police department is that there are sensitivity classes that they are put through, body cams that they are given, that there are some conversations about those police officers who have had traumatic experiences and constant evaluations and assessments of them, of their psychological stability, so that if they are not at the place where they should be, they should not be the ones called to the scene.
Agreed.
All of these things are important. Now our mayor has had to be able to go through this enough for her to know that we have a problem with it. And she's gone through it at least a couple of times in which we've had to help her to understand. And she's had to know that the community is not happy with you. With the Tatiana thing, when that happened, there was a visual that went at around Tatiana's house. And a prayer visual, and pastors were out, and people were out there, and it was very peaceful, and people were kind of praying and crying, and we were grieving together as a community. And the mayor came, and some of the community leaders had to tell her, this is not the time for you to come. You should get in your truck, and you should go back, because this is not going to go well. And she had to be rejected. Think about that. She had to be rejected for her to understand, oh, okay, this is on a whole nother level. Yes. Mm-hmm. So now when we come back to the table and talk about, okay, so what went wrong there and what else can we put in? She's more apt to listen. I just think that everybody needs to do the work in their spaces as much as they can. And that will help out as much. It won't eradicate everything, but it will make some things a little better. Yeah. One of the things I tell people all the time, and there was another, I call him associate / friend. We're still teeter-tottering. I'm trying to be as nice as possible. But he's a white guy, and his views are so special. That there's a part of me that feels sorry for him that his views are so special. Then there's another part of me that says that, okay, if I don't stay here, he's going to say something stupid and somebody going to cap him. I feel like I'm saving his life.
You're helping him.
Yeah, I'm helping. I feel like I'm helping. and his views are so interesting. But one of the things that I try to help him to understand, he just popped off a question to me. Tell me how this, and I'm like, if you don't understand people's pain, how can you criticize their passion and what they do? If my son is angry and he gets so angry, right, that he's got to be physical because he doesn't know what to do with it. There's no place to put this, because no matter how angry I get, Mr. Floyd is not coming back.
Right. Right. Exactly.
This is a life that is gone. There is no return. There is no, oops, I made a mistake, or, ooh, I apologize. When Bertha was murdered in his own apartment by an offbeat police officer who was coming home, and she killed that man in his own apartment. And you're a police officer, and albeit you say I was tired and I was overworked and all that stuff, that's no excuse. I'm not so tired that I can't discern that you my brother, and you. I mean, where are you psychologically?
Come on.
That's your first response. All I'm saying is that psychological reviews needs to happen with people, and it's not just the people in pain, because we all have got to Don, to your point, have got to be talked to by I forgot the name of the lady that you said, to help us to process our pain, so we won't do something stupid.
Yeah. Because
there's a Martin Luther King on one side of me, but there's a Malcolm X on the other side of me. and sometimes Malcolm is speaking louder than Martin. And I will put the collar down because it's not right. It's just not right. And I feel some kind of way about that, even as a preacher. It's not right.
So let me ask this question. And if I can, excuse me for cutting you off, Patrick. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Thank you.
Let me ask this question. This is because I want to learn too. Paul, Jonathan, y'all can talk to Josiah. You may be able to talk as well. How do we, I mean, as Blacks, African Americans, how do we get our white counterparts, brothers, to be more visual, to speak up more, like you said, Paul, hold a sign? What can we do to encourage, not you per se, but what can we do to encourage you basically to get in the boat?
Paul, you want to hit that first?
Well, I would say, one, I'm already in the boat. So
Yeah, you in the boat, though.
I'm trying to figure out the people who aren't in the boat. Sometimes you never know. Why are they not talking? Why are they not praying? Why are they not showing up? And you're talking about pastors, primarily.
Yeah.
Pastors. I think it starts with this, doing these conversations, getting these out there. As soon as this is released, I can't wait to share it. In fact, I was just writing down like how I'm going to get this out there and telling our network that they need to see what's being talked about here. But I think the more we get this out there, get conversations out there, the more that it's talked about, it's bound to wake up some of these pastors who aren't talking. And if it doesn't wake them up, then eventually they are, they're going to lose. A pastor who does not get involved with God's work cannot grow. They're not going to grow their ministry. This is God's work.
That's good.
This is God wants pastors in America to get involved and speak up and stand up and bring healing and talking about, these issues. And if a pastor's not going to talk about it, eventually their church is going to be left behind.
And John,
they'll be irrelevant.
Yeah.
Jonathan, before you jump in, Jonathan, I just want to say this. I'm asking the question because I want information to help me divert from my anger. Like, okay, why? Okay, I'm angry at them, but I need to know why. Okay, why are you not? What you don't see this? Like, so help me with. And I'm the pastor for those that's watching. But there's a bit of me that's angry that we're doing more, that we're allowing this to happen.
Yeah, and I completely understand that. And I think that our passivity as a white culture and even leadership in the white church is a signal. It is a sign that we condone this erroneous, horrible behavior. Whether we inwardly feel that way or not, our silence is one of the loudest ways of supporting that we condone these kind of things. So for me, and that's why I kind of deferred to Paul, because Paul and I both are in the boat. I watched Roots more times than I watched Hoosiers when I was a kid. I was raised to understand diversity. So it's hard for me to think about why people wouldn't be. I know that they have their own fears, their own stereotypes, their own concerns. But bottom line, I think if we're talking about consequences as being a part of what helps alter things, then it has to play into the leadership. I'm not a person who likes to get on social media and call people out. I don't think that's helpful. But there should be some sort of ramifications. There should be some sort of consequence in the withdrawal of our fellowship and the withdrawal of our support to people who are not vocalizing their disapproval with this nonsense. Because bottom line, guys, and this isn't meant to diminish anyone's emotions or feelings or anybody's race, but it is rather to accentuate the goodness of God and the fullness of the gospel. This is a situation that goes in fundamental teachings of Jesus. I mean, we've alluded to this all throughout this conversation. For pastors to remain silent on this is as egregious as remaining silent on certain sins that people love to talk about, whether it's abortion or homosexuality. They'll talk about that. Well, look, if you're going to use your pulpit to talk about those sins, let's talk about racism, which is killing people innocently without a choice. And for me, the only thing that I know to do, and it's not a petty game, but there has to be some consequences where we begin to let some people know, look, I don't roll with that guy. And it's hard for me to talk about pulling people into the boat because I'm not trying to be funny. I don't have a lot of relationships with people who aren't in the boat. I don't want to hang out with people. I don't want to fool around with people that's perspective is myopic. So in the meantime, as we do have to make these adjustments and figure out what to do to motivate these people and to get them moving, there has to be some sort of a consequence. There has to be people like Paul, Josiah, myself, and people of color who are willing to use their social media platforms to say what we're saying right now. Your silence is a really loud statement that you support this racism. Maybe we can put that kind of pressure, political pressure, whatever it may be, but there has to be consequences for everyone who's involved in this.
Yeah.
I will say the cancel culture is, to me, there is a damaging effect that comes upon, I think the cancel culture that's going on right now, whether it's cancel someone who said something they shouldn't have said or cancel someone because they're quiet. To me, I don't know, is that the motivation that's going to stir people up to talk, or is that going to only cause more anger and fighting and quarreling and factions and divisive, just division, which we're in election year and there is so much divisiveness going on already. There's just so much like stirring to pick a side. And I don't like that. I feel like as a pastor, you don't pick a side. You just stand in the word of God because neither side has all the answers. And so you just got to be, you got to say, you know what? I love every person and we're going to do everything we can to solve this. And we are not going to, like when John MacArthur said what he said about Beth Moore, and all these people came out and said, we need to cancel John MacArthur and we need to cut them off. They're not going to heaven. To me, I was like, no, we need to pray for him because obviously he has an issue with seeing women in the pulpit and what he said was wrong. But to just cancel to me, there's like, when you say, what should I do with my constituents who aren't talking about it and they're quiet, I think having private conversations like Paul did with Peter, having those confrontations, doing this, to me, there's a more gentle way besides just publicly saying, we cancel these, I'm not shopping at this place anymore. I'm not going there anymore. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, please tell me. I want to be open to rebuke.
Now, for me, this is what I love about this conversation. Neither is wrong as neither is right, because it's dealing with the identity. What I don't want to do is throw this large blanket, a net on everybody or every white pastor or every Latino pastor. I think it's individually based as it relates to whether it's discipline or education, I think, Paul, you're right, as opposed to as we're educating you. And then, Jonathan, you're right, as I'm educating you don't want to learn, then okay, then we're going to cancel you. So just in my eyes, as a Black pastor or a Black man, African-American, to me, you're both right, because I think it is responsible, or it is intentional. We should be intentional with our education. Okay, let's talk about this. But if I found out that I'm being intentional, but you're belligerently not wanting to learn, then at some stage I got to cut you off. Like, okay, this is becoming redundant. Like, okay, I'm not going to waste. Time is the only thing God won't give you back.
Right. And I want to be clear on this too. I don't think it does us any good in the kingdom to throw stones at people, especially on social media where we publicly come out or ostracize people. But I do think that it is important that we guard our relationships. And I don't want to throw any stones at John MacArthur either, but people who were friends with him for years were probably not taken back by his Beth Moore comment. And so I think that's important, that when we develop true, genuine relationships, we're not going to invite certain people. And there's certain people that aren't comfortable around me because they know me. They know how I feel. And that's really what I meant by consequences, not so much from a public capacity, but as Paul, you were alluding to, those backroom conversations, those private conversations where you begin to say, hey, I want to get to heaven with you, but it's going to be hard for us to run this part of our race together while you're over here and I'm over here. And I think it's important that we all, through our own convictions and standards, enforce that and see that reflected in our personal relationships.
Yeah, that's good.
And I just want to say really quick, from my standpoint, I would say for Latinos is inviting us to the table. I feel like in some sense, there's a lot of my Latino brothers and pastors that are really like, what's going on between you guys? And if you invite the Latinos to the table, we are nearly 60 million people in America. And let me tell you who we really identify with our pain. It's the African-American community.
Right.
And if we come together, you can't hide those two voices in America. Let me tell you, brother, okay? And I think that right now, this is even revolutionary. I'm going to be honest. I've seen a lot of these conversations. I'm like, how come you don't have a Latino in that conversation? It's real tough. I see a lot of preaching lineups. I go, I don't see a Latino there. I see a lot of political things. I go, I don't see no Latino there. And that is the largest demographic in America right now. There's 60 million Latinos in America. And I go, I don't see a Latino in that preaching lineup. I don't see it. So you doing this is already revolutionary, Dom. You're going to get my Latin brothers to go, hey, we got to sit at the table too. Yeah, we identify with that pain. We are also systematic racism, stereotypes, profiling, let down. You have no many. I don't know how many times I've gone on the golf course and they stereotype me all the time. All the time. They think I'm the gardener.
Yeah. Wow.
Real talk. I'll tell you right now, it's real talk. I was golfing with a certain person, and when I was golfing, he says, "Hey, why don't you tell all those gardeners in Spanish to get out of the way so we can golf?" And I looked at him. I said, "That is one of the most racist remarks." I said, "Number one, because they were far away. I said, how do you know they don't speak English? And number two, why do you right away assume that they're Latino gardeners?" So he's trying to keep us down. I've been at certain hotels where someone has come up to one of my friends and say, "Hey, I'll take a Pellegrino." They think we're the servers.
Yeah.
I'm like, excuse me? So the point I'm making is, you invite us to the table, we're going to identify with the African-American community.
Yeah.
And to everybody else's point, you won't be able to hide what side you're on, because it's going to be amplified so loudly, that there is a systematic racism with someone who doesn't have that type of skin color or privilege. And you guys know what I'm talking about. So doing this, man, I'm all for it. I'm praying with you. I stand with you guys because I can, in a small way, feel your pain in a small way.
And for me, the reason, it was crazy, and I'll tell you this, especially for those that are watching, this isn't anything that was planned out. I was sitting in the bed, and Paul was texting me, and we was texting, and I was like, "Paul, I'm just sitting here thinking, man." And he was basically saying, like, "What are you thinking about?" I said, "What do you think about if he immediately takes me back? Let's do it." So then my brain kept running. Wait a minute. Okay, if Paul and I have a conversation, that's only a two-sided conversation. So then I reached out to a few other brothers. Matter of fact, shout out to my brother who couldn't come on. He had some stuff that came up, Dr. Darius Daniels, was supposed to be on with us as well. And then I thought about Jonathan. Then I thought about you, Pastor Josiah. And I thought, how do I get all of us to the table? If you go back and study Mephibosheth in David's conversation with him, probably one of the greatest things he did was not take him out a loaded bar. He gave him a seat at the table.
Yeah.
The seat at the table is that of significance, which means I'm willing to be heard. It's not a hierarchy at the table. It's let's all have this conversation. It's not superiority. It's not white race, Latino race, black race. It's all of us can bring something to the table, and us appreciating that conversation. What's wrong? What's right? Help me learn. Help me. And that's the reason why I kind of posed that question, Paul, to you and Jonathan. Like, help me learn what I don't know so I don't operate in a level of ignorance and just come up with my own conclusion. And now, as Patrick said earlier, now you're going to get my anger. You're going to get, okay, I'm frustrated now. And that's what's happening in the community now. We're frustrated. And with Latinos being able to identify more with our voice, it's almost going to, now they're going to have a level of frustration. And then you got people that's in the boat, they're going to be frustrated. And if we don't have this talk, if we don't, as leaders, we have a voice, you have a voice. So those that aren't in the boat, let's come together, let's talk, learn, appreciate differences. It's, my son wants to open a restaurant, and I told him he has this thing about onions, and I hate onions. I said, well, son, let me tell you this, don't ever think that I'm your customer. Don't cook something because I don't like it. You need to make sure you do marketing research to know who your customer base is. And as the church, as the body, who's our customer base? The human race is.
Yeah,
right.
The human race, not black race, Latino race. Who is it? We're educated. We're diverse. For those that are watching, you get an opportunity to hear all of us from every level, from all sides of the nation. Man, my dad taught me this, and Patrick, you can attest to this. I'm bigger than being a pastor. I'm not just a black man. My friends are extended beyond my black community. It's evident. Paul, your friends are extended beyond the white community, that I can call you last minute and say, hey, let's do this. And I think the world needs to see this. And again, I'm not ending this, but I'm saying the world needs to see this.
Yeah.
To say, no, this is injustice. We need to talk about this, not just from the police standpoint as well, in the business, in corporate America, in our educational system. Let's not even talk about our educational system as opposed to what happens on one side of town versus the other side of town. It's systemic. It's crazy.
Well, hey, one last thing I wanted to share, and I might have to hop off, but I wanted to just say really, I'd like to say this to Pastor Don, Pastor Patrick, and Pastor Josiah, that I feel a burden in my heart and even just a need to apologize on behalf of just so many white brothers and white sisters in the church who have been quiet and have at times opened their mouth and said things that are very hurtful, whether it's to Latinos or to African-American community. And specifically to you, Pastor Don, for you inviting me on this, and Pastor Patrick, Josiah, as you were sharing what you were sharing on that golf course, that really bothered me. And I started thinking, I've actually heard that before. And that's what bothers me, is that I've heard what you just said. I've heard that before. And when I was a teenager, I didn't talk. I was quiet. I just kind of listened to certain people say things that were in high school, and I just kept on going and did not stand up. And then there were times that I did stand up, but, I was just sitting here and I was thinking, man, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that, that's happened. And so I love you, and I'm your brother, and we're on the same side, same team, same family. And I'm grateful that you allowed me to be a part of this.
Listen, for all those who are listening, those who are watching, I guarantee you thousands that are watching, especially from my black community, will appreciate what you just said, Paul. Because in some cases, we just want to feel compassion. In some cases, we want to know, okay, we accept your apology. And it wasn't meant for me to stop it, because I know your apology is not for me. It's for somebody who's watching, who think that every white pastor is wrong, or every Latino pastor don't understand. You don't get it. So I think that needed to be heard. And for those that are watching, let me tell you something. We could talk about this all day long. All day long. We could do several sessions of this. This was just something to kind of kickstart some call to action. And I'm gonna kind of just pose to everybody here. If you want to leave a last word or call to action, or I'm just kind of throw it out there. Again, but it's just table talk.
Let me just echo what Paul is saying as a white person, as a white pastor. The apology, the sorry, and really the word that we're looking for is repentance, because there has to be a turning. The heart of man must be convicted. The heart of man must be convicted to the point where there is a turning, where there's a changing. And I want to just add this as well. And I know I'm speaking on behalf of Paul as well, because he's my buddy and I know his heart. We're here, not just here to love and to listen, which we've always tried to do. We're here to add our voice. We're here to add our platform. If there's a sign and you need me to come hold it, I'll hold it. If there's anything that we can do, we are going to be here. Because I said this on a post I did yesterday on social media. Prayer is great. We preach prayer. It works. It changes things. But action works too. And so my call to action is simply that, Pastor Johnson, that every person watching that is of lighter skin would take a personal offense to this, not as a white person or as whatever, but as a human being, because this again is a human issue. And that whatever it is that you as a group of people, as a demographic of people need from us as a demographic of people, I'm going to do my best to make sure we are at the table, that we are as loud as you are, that we are as angry as you are, and that we are working as hard as you are. Because doggone it, somewhere before my children, whether they're here when the rapture comes or not, I want my children's generation to experience a world that is actually chipped away at this awful pandemic called racism that we've dealt with for hundreds upon hundreds of years. Those are my final thoughts.
My final thoughts are these. I appreciate the conversation. Thank you, Don, for having this. I appreciate all of you for the work that you are doing individually in your own cities and your own towns to highlight this ugliness of racism, and how you lend your voices and lend your prayers, and not just your prayers, but you lend your voices and you lend your intellectual properties as well as your ministry properties to something like this. I commend you for that. Of course, we can't solve everything all in one night, all in one day. And of course, all of this should incite some level of either mourning, grief, anger, passion, whatever, concern. But I think the more we have the conversations, not just here in this platform, but in our individual churches and ministries, in our individual communities, the more we can, just like this, create town hall meetings for the community, between police officers, between people, government officials, business leaders, then the more at least we can be able to share some level of understanding of where everyone is coming from, and to move forward so that everybody can embrace and be on the side of life. I am pro-life.
Yeah.
That also means that I am pro everybody having a right to live. And so if we can do that, I think we can move the conversation forward.
Beautiful. My final thoughts are, Jesus said, "You will know my disciples, not by how many verses they know, not by how popular they are." He says, "You will know my disciples by the way they love each other." And I just want to say thank you for modeling that, Pastor Don, Pastor Patrick, Pastor Paul, and Pastor Jonathan, and the words you guys shared. I think the better we model that, we're going to show that we really are Christ followers, and give a model for our children of something they haven't seen, something we've never seen. That's just the truth. And we have an opportunity to really showcase that for the next generation and make a huge impact, I believe, with our lives, and that we're in this together. So love you guys.
Listen, if I want to leave this final, I guess when this kind of happened, I know we can't heal anything. For those that somebody that's watching, we can't solve everything. I believe somebody said it earlier, in a day, in a year, in a decade. The intention of this conversation was to ignite some type of emotion, to get in the boat, to say something emotionally. You may not be a leader watching this. You may not be a pastor watching this, but you can teach your children how to love another culture. No matter where you are, you could be in your home, sitting and watch this on the sofa and say, well, I don't have a voice that 1,000 hear, but you have a voice that one can hear. And that one can make a change. That your child can make the change for the next, I guess, world shift. You have no idea. So this was to ignite a conversation beyond the scope of Black, white, Latinos, but let's creating a table to where we can talk. And if I could say anything to my African-American brothers, listen, I understand. God knows I understand the plight. I understand the protests, and I'm for protesting. I think it's great, but let's create some leverage. And now I'm talking economic with somebody. Let's create some type of leverage. It's good to protest, but you have power when you can leverage something, when you own something. We are the greatest consumers and the worst investors. We are the greatest consumers and the worst investors. We wear our wealth. And again, this I'm saying this, not my brother Paul. I love you, Paul. No, I'm saying this. We wear our wealth. We buy the things. And I'm not saying I'm against prosperity. I'm saying let's create leverage to where we own something. So when we do get invited to the table, come here, Bishop. I love you, Bishop Jakes. Now you've chopped off Goliath's head. In other words, you have to bring something to the table. Let's create leverage. Let's talk about ownership. Let's talk about buying property and owning property. So when we come to the table, we bring some value, and we don't bring just a scream and throwing rocks against that. I'm for protesting. In some cases, I'm not against how we're protesting, but I understand it. I really do. So if I can leave us with that, is this was to ignite a level of conversation, as well as to say, listen, let's create leverage. Let's own something. Let's buy something. Let's invest in each other's. We're bigger than that. Those who are watching us, I'm Pastor Don, Pastor Patrick, Pastor Josiah, Pastor Paul, Pastor Miller. We are a culmination of who we are. We wanted to show you, those that are watching, we're bigger than the Black church. We're bigger than the white church. We are the church. We are the church. This is what it looks like. This is what it looks like. And man, I love you all. I love you all for saying yes.
We love you.
Love you, man.
I love you guys.
Thanks, John. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Love you guys.
Take care. Have a good day.
Later.